Welcome back to the Licensed Game Hole. The Hole is still a very experimental space for us as a creator and a critic, as shown by last time's change, and we're making a change again here to kind of file off the recap part of Recap Review and just do a straightforward review. Naturally, this is a bit of a weird space, as we've already talked about Fallen Order some, so we're going to write this like you've watched at least one of those videos, and thus at least know the cast of characters, basic plot of the game, and core gameplay. We're also going to freely spoil the game here in order to talk about its greater thematic substance, although we're going to keep a few things secret. Let's talk about the game's story first, which is focused on the themes of trauma and found family. Our comparison of Grease to Rocket is maybe not undue, as there is definitely a familiar ringing to Guardians of the Galaxy, as disparate people affected by trauma come together to fight a greater evil. No classic rock soundtrack or dick jokes, but there's some familiarity here. At times, though, Fallen Order feels like it's pushing its themes too hard, with no subtlety. Several times, Cal and Cere talk about their trauma and the need to move forward and find hope. We get it, you want to be understood, but more than once feels like too much. It seems to not know what information needs to be told, as with Cere, where the game shows you what happened after you've already been told, and acts like this adds more when, no, it's pretty much what you've already been told. It seems scared to let what happened speak for itself and shine through in these characters. We discover Cal's trauma comes from his fear when Order 66 happened, and he blames himself for Jaro Topal's death. But this never really shows at all in the game itself. As soon as the stormtroopers attack, you start hacking away. It's one of those times when the gameplay and story are too segregated. Indie games about trauma have learned this lesson long ago, but as with Cal and Trilla turning from heated foes to bickering idiots, it's clear there was quite a bit of disconnect between the cutscene team and the gameplay team. We also eventually find out that Cal's lightsaber was actually Jaro's, which is when Cere insists that he needs to make a new lightsaber because he's literally been holding on to his trauma.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
Mostly, it's unfortunate that all this unsubtlety leads to the conclusion of you must move on from trauma and find hope, which isn't very novel. To its credit, at least, the game does fully go through with this theme to the end, down to an ending where a choice is made to break a cycle of trauma. Every character is compelled by their own personal trauma. Except for Grease, who just doesn't have any? After you get free from the Haxion brood on Ordo Eris, where we were last time, hey, at least we covered that cliffhanger, Grease has a moment of, I used to not care about anybody, but now I care about you, which is not at all earned. See, only Cal got captured. This moment could have worked if Grease had been captured too. Maybe Cal could have gotten away without Grease, but he makes a big deal that he's not going to leave a friend behind. Instead, Grease feels criminally underdeveloped. We wonder if Ordo Eris was meant to be more. Outside of Braca, it's the only planet you visit that has no exploration and no ability to return to it. This seems like it could have been a great moment to develop on Grease and what he's gone through, but the game never actually takes this opportunity. That isn't to say the game is a complete whiff thematically, though. Less highlighted, and thus more interesting, is the sense of shared societal trauma. While Cere and Cal have very different events that have happened to them, their trauma is still unified by the imperialism that has caused it. The planets you go to have been damaged by the Empire, as they've built up their bases and engage in the killing of natives and the desecration of artifacts. There is a greater theme here of the scars that colonialism leaves on the survivors. Speaking of survivors, while the gang stays mostly stable throughout, near the end, Night Sister Marin joins you and notes that her and Cal are survivors of war, as Cal is one of the last Jedi and she's the last living Night Sister. This might be one of our favorite scenes in the game, and we wish they had expanded on this concept. Imagine if your crew also had a Wookiee whose home was destroyed by the Empire, or a Zepho native who survived the culling. The game has a repeated note on the importance of unity against the Empire, and it'd be fun if your ragtag crew really represented that in full, the gathering of a bunch of loners who have to come together for a greater calling. Instead, your crew stays mostly static, so Marin joining is fun, but it's a little weird that it only happens so late in the game. Even with the bumps in the story, the acting never falters. While Monaghan has his problems in gameplay, he brings it to each cutscene, and the motion capture work really brings these characters to life. The way his eyes light up when he rescues BD-1, or his excitement on taking down Ninth Sister that plays out like a kid reporting that they got an A on their math test. The way Deborah Wilson plays Seer close to the chest, letting a glance away speak more than her words can. Tony Amendola describing the wonder and pain of Cordova's journey. Luke Cook getting to flamboyantly play up Sork Tormo, a character that has a handful of lines.
Who am I? I'm Sork Tormo, baby. I'm the boss of this operation.
This is a cast full of colorful, memorable characters, brought to life with talented acting and direction. Maybe the themes get old, but the actors deliver the material well. Gameplay-wise, the game is quite fun. One of the things that we were surprised about is how much platforming you do in this game. The game mostly uses a limited set of elements throughout, but the sequences stay interesting thanks to the way it mixes them together. If Respawn ever wants to make a straight-up cartoon platformer, they should go for it. As you get your skill set up, the exploration of each planet fully opens up, and it feels like they all have a lot to see. While each planet stays with the single biome planets that Star Wars is famous for, there's so much on each planet that you don't feel bored. Dathomir goes from dusty cliffs and dilapidated temples down to the swamps where undead Night Sisters chase after you. Kashyyyk takes you from the refinery into the Shadowlands, where giant Venus flytraps try to eat you and indestructible vines chase after you. Each world feels truly sprawling, while shortcuts and varied paths keep crossing them manageable. And while there may be a few too many chests of cosmetic items around, mostly the exploration pays off. Whether you get more health and force or a little extra bit of lore, very rarely do you feel that a challenge wasn't worth it. The focus of the game is obviously the combat, and it constantly shines. Even on the easier difficulty, the game keeps finding new ways to challenge you, and stays at such a challenging level that we did end up bumping down to story near the end. Like the platforming, the combat is a smart mixing of elements, so each battle can feel entirely different. When you enter a battle, you have to quickly do threat assessment and decide on your strategy. Fighting an enemy for the first time requires caution until you know what their moveset is. We were a bit disappointed that there are only 3 force powers, but you also know exactly what you have and what you can do. Knowing when to use force push is as important as the ability to use force push at all, and the lightsaber skills you buy can change up how you play. The highlights are definitely the bosses. Each boss will slowly add more moves to their movesets, keeping you on your toes and testing your ability to deflect. It's just a shame that there's so few of them. There are a whopping total of 4 bosses in the game, 6 if you count the fact that you fight Second Sister 3 times, which we don't. And that's only actual bosses, not reskins of enemies or big enemies that you will fight several times like the ATST. All of them are great, but there should be double that number for a Souls-like. And the non-boss fill-ins all feel disappointing because they don't have multiple phases or tricks to figure out. At one point, the game makes you fight 2 ATSTs. It feels more like a waste of time than a shocking new fight. The ATST is definitely the single worst enemy type in the game, and thankfully you only see it a handful of times because it's the one moment combat really screws up, doing the fatal flaw of just being boring. There are also these bounty hunters you fight at several points after Ordo Eris, and we were surprised to find that these fights are apparently optional. In this fight, dying against these 2 just unspawned them? Guess that makes sure you don't get frustrated against them, but we were having fun. Ran into them again on the way out, died again, and again they unspawned. Keep them there. Let's actually face down the challenge. Mostly, though, we feel the lack of bosses probably speaks to a slightly rushed schedule. Remember, this game came out in November of 2019, a month before the release of Rise of Skywalker, and that kind of joint release tends to be an act of brand synergy from some execs who didn't care about the actual work being done. Some weird glitches and interactions also speak to a game that maybe isn't always working as well as it should have. Then again, that's an EA guarantee, isn't it? If there's one spot where the game really doesn't click, it's the puzzles. There are only 3 puzzle areas, but they all feel woefully simple. We almost don't want to even point them out, but there's a whole thing where BD1 can offer you hints on these puzzles, so clearly they thought they were going to be a big deal. Zelda puzzles are satisfying because it feels like they involve the entire dungeon, and putting them together feels like you've finished the dungeon as much as fighting the boss does. Here, they all just feel like weird obstacles that have an idea behind them, but that idea never really goes past use light to melt ice. Then the game never does anything more with that. A room where you use light to melt ice is forgettable. A whole planet about melting ice? That could have been something. Finally, we must ask the most important question of any licensed game. Does this feel like Star Wars? Yeah, duh. Fallen Order is a rip-roaring adventure across the galaxy with near misses, exciting action, and a classic plot of good versus evil. From the word go, the game never stops delivering on what makes Star Wars so beloved. There's plenty of lore for longtime fans to dig into, but the story stays standalone enough that you could pick this up not knowing a Star Destroyer from a TIE Fighter, and still be enthralled by the world that has been created. The fanservice never engulfs everything else going on, and Respawn give themselves plenty of space to add to the world, with new characters and planets that echo themes without following the same stories. And there's a certain cameo of a very popular character that manages to still feel like a good use of that character. Overall, the game is a solid Star Wars experience, bringing single-player Star Wars back in spectacular form, and thank God for that. Even as the game takes bits and pieces from other games, what it creates out of those pieces is a lot of fun. It's an engaging Metroidvania with challenging Soul-style combat. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order gets a 5 out of 5 for adaptation and a 4 out of 5 for fun. We definitely look forward to playing Jedi Survivor in the future. Thank you all for watching. We're glad to be in a space where we can still experiment and find our place doing these videos. Remember that if you watch this video, a like really means a lot to us. You can also check out the description where we've got links to our Discord and our Patreon, which has just opened up. We'll see you next time in the hole for LEGO The Hobbit. See you all then!